About 2 years ago, I moved into a new apartment. The walls were very thin, and because of the fire safety laws in my city, my bedroom had one window which led into the living room, and none with outside access. The window will be important later. It was 3 bedrooms, one for me, one for the master tenant, and one spare, which at the time was rented out by a pretty friendly guy. Well, the friendly guy had issues with his work visa and had to move back to Canada last minute, leaving us about 2 weeks to find another roommate. Our quickest and easiest option was Craigslist. Due to my work schedule, I had no part in the selection process, but I was content when the new roommate moved in a little later. He seemed a bit off but friendly. He was a very tall, large guy but pretty quiet, and not someone I wanted to go out of my way to hang out with, but I was okay to be around and be cordial with. About 2 weeks into his move-in, the master tenant left for Hawaii, leaving him and I alone in the home for a month-long duration of his stay. For the first few days, things are pretty normal. All of a sudden, about 4 days into the trip, I am woken up about 8 a.m. to a frantic knocking at my door. My roommate, we'll call him Kyle, is standing there when I open up, looking frazzled. He looked me dead in the eyes and said, "So, do you want to tell me what went on last night?" To which I was shocked and confused because I had come home from work at about 9 p.m. and immediately showered and went to bed. I explained this to him and he tells me that he heard me screaming and arguing with someone in my room, that he saw me in the side alley out the window, arguing with our landlord, whom I had never even seen at that point, that he heard people coming in and out of our house. I tell him no way, none of that ever happened. After staring at me for a little longer, he leaves and he doesn't bring it up again. The next morning, I wake up to the same thing. This time, he says that he saw me arguing with my boyfriend. I was single at the time. Had seen me talking with our other roommate, who's in Hawaii, and asking me for the badge number of the officer that I had spoken to, since he had apparently seen me talking to a bunch of police as well. This time, I get angry and more or less tell him to cut this crap out, because I'm not doing anything and I don't know what he's talking about. He gets a weird look on his face and says, "I think I had a seizure in my sleep. The next time it happens, call an ambulance." And he leaves for a bit, only to start knocking again about an hour later, and when I open up, Kyle repeats the exact same story verbatim. This happens once more before I tell him to leave me the heck alone and leave for work. I go to work as normal and I am reluctant to return that night, but I'm too tired to switch to an alternate location. Big mistake. About 1 a.m., I wake up to slamming doors. Kyle is pacing back and forth between his bedroom, the living room, and out the front door, walking in and out of each room, turning the lights on and off, mumbling angrily and slamming the doors. I can see his figure pacing back and forth through the frosted window in my room that leads to the living room. Since my room is dark, he can't see inside. Suddenly, he screams, "I can't live like this. Why are you doing this to me?" I think he's on the phone and I don't respond. A few moments later, he screams my name repeatedly and I realize that he's directing it towards me. I knew I had to get the heck out of there. So I very quietly creep out of bed and start getting dressed and packing a bag of clothes for work in the morning. I'm almost done when he screams, "I hear you," and charges over to my room, slapping the wall next to my door and not touching the door itself. I look toward my window and I see his shadow lean all the way forward, pressing his ear up against the glass. I was terrified and sat completely still, unmoving. He eventually screams my name again and moves away from the window, and I hear him start pacing between rooms again. Now, my shoes are kept on a rack outside of my door, and not inside of my room, so I know that when I'm going to leave, I'm going to need to take a moment to put them on. I decide to wait until his pacing takes him out the front door again, at which time I plan to grab my shoes, put them on, and run. As I'm formulating this plan, the pacing stops. He screams, "Do you want to fight about this? Come out right now and we'll fight, I swear to God." Now, I'm a very small 5-foot girl, and this guy is easily 3 times my size, so I'm definitely not looking for a fight, thanks but no thanks. After a few minutes, he turns off all the lights and I hear the door to his room open and close, followed by silence. I wait for a moment to be sure that I can't hear any movement, and then I decide to take my chance. I took a deep breath and pulled my door open quietly. I step out and grab my shoes before I look up a second later, and I see him standing shirtless with just a pair of boxers and socks on in the dark of the hallway. His arms hung slightly outward in an awkward position. He says in a low, calm voice, "Ma'am, we need to talk." That was a hard no for me, so I grab my shoes and run out the door with them in hand. I run about a half block barefoot before I stop and put them on. When I look back, he's standing in the porch lights of our front door, watching me run but not moving. Luckily, I had a friend who lived 2 blocks away and I had their spare key, so I let myself in and I crashed there for the night. And that's where I stayed for the next week or so while we worked things out with the master tenant, and Kyle agreed to move out within the week. He said that he doesn't remember anything that happened, or wasn't sure if it was real or not. But if I said that's what went down, then it must be real. The day Kyle left, he sent me a photo of the house key sitting on the table and says, "I'm out, nothing else." I take a friend over there with me to scout it out and ensure that he actually left. And when we get there, we discover that not only had he left a ton of food and furniture, but he had ripped all the fire alarms out of the ceilings. He had unscrewed and removed the deadbolt to the front door, and left them lined up neatly on the front table. We then realized that my front door can only lock by using a key from the outside, and that it had been locked when we had arrived, meaning Kyle still had a key. We called a locksmith immediately. Even after changing the locks, I was still terrified to stay there alone afterwards, and never went to sleep at night without barricading the doors with chairs and other furniture. To this day, I still fear for his safety. He was obviously psychologically unstable, but I also wonder what could have happened if I hadn't been as lucky as I was. Hey, my name's Tom and I live in the St. Louis area, and this is a story about something that happened to me that almost ruined my life forever. When I was 21 years old, I broke up with my first ever serious girlfriend, who I had been together with for 8 months. Needless to say, I was devastated. I fell into a deep depression and I began abusing painkillers and Xanax really heavily, and I began looking for any girl that I could find a rebound with. I ended up looking on the personal section on Craigslist, and I found an ad for a girl named Stephanie. I began talking to her, and I had arranged for her to come pick me up on a night, and we had intercourse that night and decided to make it a regular thing. She was an older lady, about 35, and a bigger girl, but she had her own apartment and enough money to keep me loaded on as much drugs and alcohol as I wanted. And to be honest, I really just kind of used this lady. After a while, she grew really attached to me and started to want a more serious relationship. Eventually, she started dropping hints about wanting to get married. She said that she wanted to do this to help me out, so that she could get me on her insurance so I could get help with my drug and alcohol problem, which I refused to consider. One day, we got into a big argument and she told the police that I had been abusing her and got a temporary restraining order on me. A week after she did this, she called me crying her eyes out saying, "Please forgive me, I love you," and all that other stuff. and said that she wanted to come pick me up and buy me some dope and alcohol, and get me something to eat. And being the addict that I am, I of course accepted. From the moment that she had picked me up, I noticed that she was acting kind of odd. She was usually really talkative and was always on my butt wanting to talk to me about this and that. But this day, she was oddly quiet. And we got back to her apartment after I had walked in, and she immediately pushed me on the couch and pulled me down and started doing stuff. And then she climbed on top of me and began doing you know what. And she seemed angry when I didn't want to finish. I had been getting bad vibes off her the whole night, so after this happened, I immediately asked for a ride back home, which she quickly agreed to do. After I got dropped off at the house, I went inside and I sat down. My sister was watching SpongeBob, so I went and watched it with her. About 10 minutes after I had gotten home, I got a call on the phone. I picked it up, and to my surprise, a lady on the other end said that it was the St. Louis County Police Department, and that they were going to need me to come outside and talk for a second. I ran downstairs and hid my weed and my pills and then walked outside to figure out what the heck was going on. When I walked outside, there were about 7 different cops on the porch, and they were all pointing tasers at me. One of them hit me in the back of my leg with a nightstick and put me on the ground, and I was handcuffed. The cops then talked to my mom and got permission to go inside of the house, where they took a drug dog and began doing a thorough search of my room and my basement area. None of the cops on the scene would tell me what was going on whenever I would ask a question about why they were doing what they were. They told me that I would have to talk to the detective at the station. When I got to the police station, I had a bombshell dropped on me apparently. This lady had accused me of kidnapping her. She told the police that she had come by my house to return some of the stuff because we had just broken up. It was then that I had forced her by knife into her car, and that's when I kidnapped her. But thankfully, I had remembered that we made a couple of stops on the way to her apartment. She had gone inside of a gas station to get a couple of packs of cigarettes with me, so there was no way that I could have kidnapped her. The police still did a swab for DNA, and they also took my clothes for evidence, and I was forced to spend the rest of the night in the St. Louis County Jail, wearing nothing but hospital scrubs. I was released the next morning, but my ordeal was far from over. This lady began constantly stalking me. She would call me every night at odd times from blocked numbers, and either crying into the phone or just begging to talk to me. I also began seeing her vehicle quite a lot in the neighborhood, even though she lived nowhere near close to me. I called the police about this a couple of times, but they didn't really seem to care. They told me that I would have to get a restraining order on her in order to make it stop. I wanted nothing to do with the court system because I have a criminal record, and I just decided to ignore her, and I hoped that the problem would go away. After a couple months, she finally did stop bothering me as much. However, to this day, I sometimes get calls at 2 or 3 in the morning from blocked numbers. And every new girlfriend that I get, she will message them on Facebook and try to run them off. Moral of the story: be careful who you meet online. Whether you're a guy or a girl, all it takes is one crazy person to completely ruin your life. Hey guys, this is my first time posting. I thought I would tell a story about one of the more creepy encounters that I've had so far. At the time, I was a few months into undergrad in Austin, Texas, and had just become comfortable enough with myself to come out of the closet. At the time, there were no dating apps available, so to find dates I used Craigslist. It's a big mistake. I started chatting with a guy off Craigslist, Craig, and we headed off and decided to set a time and place for a date to meet in person. His ad said that he was 27 and I was 18 at the time. At first, he was insistent on meeting at his place, which I later found out was just a trailer. And it kind of made me suspicious, but in his pictures, he was very good looking. He had a nice smile, etc. so I decided to let it go. Eventually, we agreed to get coffee before going to his place. So, the day arrived and I went to get coffee and I was pretty excited. I had shown my roommates pictures of Craig and talked about how I was looking forward to meeting him. I showed up at the coffee shop and he was already there. He actually did look like his pictures, so that was a good start. We got coffee and ended up chatting for several hours before he asked whether I wanted to go back to his place. Luckily, my roommate called to check up on me, and it also happened that he was stranded because his car had broken down. So I told Craig that I would take my friend back home before heading over to his place. Well, by the time that I picked up my friend, etc., Craig was no longer answering his phone or text messages or anything. And when he finally answered, he accused me of making up some excuse so I wouldn't have to go back to his place. And basically, he was very angry and annoyed despite our great conversation earlier. I was a bit bummed, but basically didn't think of him again until years later, when my old roommate sent me a link for a news article about Craig. Apparently, he had been running a kidnapping operation using boys that he would lure through his good looks and promises. I can only imagine what would have happened to me if I had gone back to his trailer with him that day. This happened a few years back when I was 23 and I was starting graduate school. I was new to the area and looking for an apartment. I'm not too picky, but on a grad school stipend, I needed something cheap. I was admittedly naive and decided to include some Craigslist postings in my search. I saw an ad for a one-bedroom apartment. I want to stress it was advertised as a one-bedroom, one-bathroom. Looking back, I should have known that it was too good to be true. A one-bedroom condo on the water with a fireplace and a dock for kayaks. It was huge, 2 floors, and had a very nice up-to-date look for only $500 a month, most utilities included. In the ad, it was bolded, "Seeking woman tenants only." When I arrived, thankfully I was smart enough to bring my boyfriend. I was greeted at the door by a middle-aged man, about 55, in a stained tank top and boxers that stood a little too close. I immediately got an uneasy vibe from him. I wanted to leave then and there, but I felt obligated to see the place. He seemed very uncomfortable with my boyfriend being there, and mentioned that he usually just rents to women. I initially thought that he was just the landlord looking to find a tenant to lease to, until he mentioned that he was looking for a roommate to share the apartment, and that it was usually a 2-bedroom, 1-bath. He initially tried to have me come in alone to view the apartment while my boyfriend waited outside. However, I insisted on having him come along. As he showed me around the place, it was very dark and pretty empty. I remember thinking it was strange that he didn't have much furniture since he currently lives there. I can't explain fully, but the way that he showed me around the apartment felt as if he hadn't really planned on showing anyone around, and he kind of fumbled through each room. I would ask questions about how much certain utilities were, or rules of the lease, and he would have to think about it for a few seconds, and then he would answer like he'd never thought about it prior to that. The entire time he was standing very close to me. At one point my boyfriend asked him to give some space. When he showed me what would be my room, it was gross. The walls were peeling. There was a bed with a mattress covered in dark stains. It was very odd considering the rest of the apartment was in good shape. The weirdest part was that he would not let me see the bathroom. He said that there was some damage from the previous tenant that he needed to fix up. I think about it all the time. What was in there? Overall, I got a very bad vibe. I couldn't get to my car fast enough. My boyfriend and I talk about how different that might have gone if he wasn't with me.